everybody. This is the second half to a Tropes video that I did with Laura at Laura's Library Card. This is really just a bookish, chatty discussion that's really fun. So the first half is over on her channel where we talk about our favorite tropes, and the second half you're going to find right here.
So what are some of the tropes that it had that are your least favorites? Or let's transition to our least favorite tropes.
Okay, so what I didn't like was one half of the couple, or in this case it's a romance. So in one half of the couple has like unlimited funds. They're a multi-millionaire, billionaire, trillionaire, and they can like throw money at everything and fix every problem. That I feel like that's really overdone. In every book I read, there's, even if it's not a romance, like we read. So I was saying, where one part of the couple or one character in the story is like super rich and can throw money at any problem, and that's the solution to everything. And in the last book we discussed, You Can See Me in a Crown, one of Liz's friends was her parents, I guess, not her so much. Her parents were rather wealthy, and she could throw all kinds of money into the campaign and buying supplies. And that made it, I think, really easy. I just think one character or one half of the couple having like unlimited funds. Can you hear the dogs?
Who cares?
I think that one character or one part of the couple having unlimited funds makes things just too easy. I think it takes away from, I don't know, finding out like what you're made of.
Yeah.
And I would rather see the struggle or the hard work rather than just the like the handout, basically.
Yeah. I feel that is a very common trope that I see a lot of, mostly because I read romance. And so I frequently feel like there's one character, and let's be real, it's usually the man in romances who just like comes from money, or like he's the CEO or whatever. And so like, you know, it's like, oh, you want to go on a date with me? Great. I'm going to wear my Gucci suit and we're going to fly in my private jet
and I'm going to buy you a super expensive dress as a gift.
Right.
Yeah.
And so it's just, I definitely agree. I feel like the like billionaire dating a commoner is like really common, and not a trope that I don't like hate that trope, but I agree that it's annoying when that person's just like, throw some money at it.
It just solves all the problems.
Yeah.
And I don't know, particularly in a couple, I don't need people to be like poor in a romance story, but I don't know, like figuring out money that certainly lends to I don't know, like the formation of a relationship in real life. So maybe that's why we read books, to escape that. But I just don't like that money is like the solution to every problem every character has in the book. Yeah.
I just read a book last week where the two it's a romance, and two characters are taking a road trip, and the one is essentially funding the whole trip. Like she's paying for their rooms and their food and their everything, but at the same time she's not like a gazillionaire. So I felt like that was like the arrangement they made going into it. But it wasn't like at any stop she was just like, well, we're staying in 5-star hotels, we're buying lobster every night for dinner, you know, it's like she's just arranged. And so that way it takes the how am I going to pay for it tension out of a book, because that's sometimes obnoxious to read. But also it's not just like jets and diamonds everywhere.
Right.
But I think
so I agree with you. I don't love when one character or one half of a partnership has a lot of money and just throwing the money at the problem fixes it. I don't really like that.
Yeah, I agree. One of my least favorite tropes is when it's usually the female protagonist, but when one protagonist like can't see how wonderful they are. Like when Bella is just like,
that on mine too.
That's one of yours? Okay. So like, it's so obnoxious to me when the person is like, I wish I was beautiful, she says as she slips into her size 2 jeans and flings back her honey colored hair and puts some beautiful mascara on her perfect high cheekboned blue eyes. And I'm just like, you are conventionally attractive. Like, how can you not, like, you know, it's just obnoxious.
I don't like it when she thinks that she's this total like plain Jane and
but everybody's fussing over her and fawning over her. That's just not, it's not enjoyable for me. Like, come
Yeah.
on, you're not fooling anybody. And I also had a note here that said, why is she always blonde? Like, why why can't she be, I don't know, brunette, redhead, strawberry blonde, pick something. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like Bella in Twilight, again, we come back to Twilight, she is like convinced that she's not fascinating, that there's nothing interesting about her, and yet she gets asked out by like 4 different guys.
Yeah, for real. And they like sort of fight over her.
Yeah. Like everyone's just like, Bella's the best. And
I'm not gonna lie, I didn't get it. I'm like, why is she the best? Is it just because she's new?
I mean, I think that to some extent, yeah, like at the start of that book, like everyone who's infatuated with her is just because she's the shiny new toy. But like, what's frustrating is that it is if your main character is just like, I'm nobody special, then she like flips her hair back and she shoots fireballs out of her eyes. It's like, I think you're special. Okay, could you chill? Like,
there's something there. Yeah.
There's something. So it's obnoxious to have to like wade through like, I don't understand why he might like me. And I'm just like, because you're competent and pretty, because
yeah,
you've described yourself that way. And even if you're like, I wish I was pretty, and then you describe yourself with conventionally attractive features, like
what are you missing?
Yes. Yeah. So that's a trope that I dislike.
It's just hard. Like, even when I was writing this, I was like, that's not fair to people who have, I don't know, like low self-esteem because they've had some trauma or been emotionally abused or they have body dysmorphia or something. But I'm not taking into consideration those people. I'm just taking into consideration like the character that's gorgeous and is like, I don't get it.
I can't believe I landed this modeling contract.
I know.
And then they're like, and she's like, I'm not pretty. And I'm like, if you landed the contract, maybe you are.
Yeah, maybe you're not seeing what everybody else sees.
Mm-hmm. What is another of your least favorite tropes?
Okay, this was more of an element that I see like continuously, and like I feel like every book I read like this month almost, where the characters' parents are dead. Mm-hmm. Like for no purpose to the story. Not like in Harry Potter where his parents died saving him from Voldemort. It just like for no purpose, the parents are dead, they're orphaned, or similarly the parents are like total like there but totally uninvolved and encourage total reckless behavior and don't keep tabs on the kids or care what they're doing. I feel like that's really overdone. Like, I don't know very many parents like that, so why are they in every book I read?
Yeah. I agree that I feel that is a very common trope or element that I see is the absent or dead parents scenario, or the main character is an orphan or whatever. I don't know why it's done so much. I think it's supposed to like easily give the character like a traumatic or tragic backstory because they grew up with a dead mom or whatever. And also supposed to like give you make you sympathetic to that character because like life must have been tough being an orphan.
Life must have been tough because you were deprived of like a typical childhood.
I guess. I'm not sure. I also think it's to some extent, I don't want to say lazy, but it leaves open opportunities for the parent to come back, you know, for like your long lost mom to not actually have been dead this whole time, which is its own separate set of problems in my opinion.
Right.
But it also like it is less work on an author's point. They don't have to include those characters, and then also they don't have to like have the figure of who guidance can be anybody else, you know what I mean?
Right. Can be like the Haymitch character.
Yes
I just feel like if it really serves no purpose for those people to be dead, why make them dead? Is it because we grew up on Disney movies where like the mom always dies or the parents are always dead, that it's like now when somebody writes a book they're like, I know, I'll make the parents dead? I
don't know.
It feels so unnecessary and overdone to me.
I think that, I mean, this is me totally spitballing off the top of my head. I think that maybe 300 years ago, it was much more common to lose your parents young because everybody died at like 35. So
now you're making me feel bad. Like there's this whole group of the population whose parents died when they were young, and I'm like, that's totally invalid, and
well,
who cares?
it's not invalid, but like it is overdone. Like I think it's actually harder for us to come up with books where both parents are present and alive. Or even if they're both alive, if they're both like there in the house.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, so I think that it's,
maybe it's a bigger commentary on families and life today than I realize.
possibly.
I live in my own safe little bubble. I don't know.
You know what I
think
mean?
it just makes it easier for the character to do whatever they want, or other
Yeah.
people to enter that character's world and not have to worry about the influence of the parents or meeting the parents or involving the parents when the parents are dead or they just don't care what you're doing.
Yeah. I also think that we are reading from I read mostly from like a American and, East and like Western European standpoint, where it is much more normalized in this day and age to not be having the same relationship to your parental and grandparents generations as in other cultures. In other cultures, multiple generations live together, and it's much more acceptable for your parents to be involved in who you marry and your social connections and your social circles. So it might be that some of the literature that we're reading is very like American based, where it's important for the main character to have that independence from their family because they need to stand as a singular unit. Whereas in other cultures, that person can still be seen as an independent person even when their parents are involved in their family. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Maybe you're right, because I still, like, my mom lives next door. I still see her every day. We still hang out. And same thing with my husband's family. His whole giant extended family is here. And we are sort of like, we always do things as this big unit, that it's weird for me to think like there's like a huge amount of the population that don't have that.
Yeah. I think it just really depends on how you grow up. I think most people in America in the last, this is a very broad generalization, but I think that most people don't live that close to their families. And so therefore, it's not unusual to only see your family 2 or 3 times a year or less. And so like maybe those people identify more with the absent parent trope.
Mm-hmm. See, because I that's kind of what I had growing up, where we didn't have people near us. We only saw them a handful of times a year, and I hated that. I never wanted to leave. Well, first of all, I never wanted to go. And then when we were there, I never wanted to leave to come home.
Yeah.
And I would have done anything to be like, I'm going out the back door and walking to Nana's. Like, I would have done it. I loved that. Like, I love that now. And I wish I'd had that when I was a kid.
Yeah.
So most people don't have that now, but I feel like if they did have that, they would love it.
Maybe you're right.
Assuming that people are like mentally healthy and
yes.
functioning.
And have good
if they're
family.
not, then if they're toxic, then please don't.
Yes. And I think that there's a lot of that happening too. I feel like it's only now here in the last couple of years been socially acceptable to discuss how people's families are dysfunctional. Like, you had to present a united, everything's fine front for so long.
Yes, like I think like 1950s perfect. Like, I'm in the kitchen in my perfect little dress and my apron, and my 2 kids, or my 1 boy and my 1 girl, are playing in the backyard and they don't bother me all day.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I feel like that was like the picture of perfect that people need to portray.
Yeah.
And now I feel like it's like we're becoming more like what's socially acceptable and accepting that you're not what was like the norm.
Yeah.
And that's okay.
Do you have any book examples more similar to your lived experience where there's multiple families closely together and highly involved in each other's lives, lots of siblings, lots of families?
Like in a book or other people around me?
In a book.
Not that I can think of off the top of my head. I suppose like you mentioned earlier, like I read a lot of books that take place in like
current day, like American culture. If I read books that were maybe more of like a Hispanic culture or an Asian culture where they like continue to stay close to their grandparents or their like older relatives, and you know they have an influence on their life, like maybe I would feel like that's more like the family I have right now.
Yeah. I've read a number of romance series where each book in the series is following a different family member. And so to some extent, you sort of get that because there's like 7 or 8 kids, and then like each book is like their individual kid number 1, kid number 2, kid number 3's love stories. But usually those are like adults, and like we're seeing, you know, they're pairing off and going off and starting their own romantic, you know, marriage or whatever over here. So I wish there were more. I don't know. It's definitely easier from a writer's standpoint to have fewer characters.
Right.
So.
Yeah.
I agree that I see the absent/dead parent trope regularly. I don't hate it, but I don't love it. It's sort of like a neutral thing for me.
I don't hate it. Like, hate is a really strong word. I just feel like it's so overdone, where I'm like, oh, the parents are dead again. Okay.
I agree.
Oh, the parents are totally checked out and they don't care that there's like 15 kids hanging out in the living room and they're all drunk or stoned. Like,
right. I agree with that. The adults are useless trope. Yeah. Like where, like even when the adults are there, sort of like Lemony Snicket books where like the adults are just messing up and the kids are like, let's fix this. And I'm like,
well, Lemony Snicket is for a younger audience. Where
yeah,
kids
but
like that they're following the character that gets to solve everything. Yeah.
But even in like classic like John Hughes movies, like the parents go out of town and the kids throw these huge ragers, and I'm just like,
don't you want to know who cleans up after that? Because I don't know any teenagers that could clean up satisfactory after a party that their parents would come home and be like, hi, did you have a good weekend?
In those movies, those people are usually rich in those big, huge mansions. So they probably like
where somebody has money and it solves everything.
Right. They call the cleaning crew. And no, I didn't know those people either. So I'll say one of my least favorite tropes. It's not really like a trope, but like it's something I see regularly. So I don't know. I guess we're calling it a trope. I'm calling it a trope. Is when
for this purpose it serves.
Yes. When a character is injured and they're like, oh, my stomach was just punctured. And then they like rest for one night. And then they're like, well, the world still needs saving. And they get up and they're fine like the next day.
I have massive internal bleeding, but I'm ready.
Right. Yeah. When there's no time for recovery, it drives me nuts.
Or totally unrealistic recovery. Like you don't come back from a stomach puncture. Like that's game over, man.
I mean, yeah, unless it's 2010 and you're 5 minutes from a hospital, you're even really in some serious trouble.
I've watched enough things to know that like a gut wound is sort of like.
Well, I mean, in this day and age, it would certainly take a long recovery, but like it's really frustrating to me when someone like it, I mean, I see this more in like fantasy and fighting action movies where like the person gets injured, they're like stabbed, sliced with a sword, and they just kind of like bandage it up, and then they're like on the field ready to go the next day. And I'm like,
have you ever seen, it's on YouTube, it's a doctor that watches, like the one I saw was Die Hard.
Is he really cute?
Like, I don't remember. It's probably. No, you're thinking of the one that's been more recently that I've seen on Facebook. Where
I think his name was like Dr. Mike or something.
Yeah, no, I don't think it's the same guy. But this guy sort of watches movies where they're like doing things like falling down an elevator shaft, or they get like a stomach wound, or like a head trauma, and they're still going to get right back up and keep fighting. And he says like how many lives they'd have like to complete all these things, and it would be like 14 lives. For Bruce Willis to make it out of this, and you're like, oh, you see, like that's how I feel when I watch something. I'm like, no, they'd be dead. They're dead.
I mean, it doesn't have to be 100% realistic.
No, yeah, right. It doesn't have to be 100% realistic, but you're not bouncing back 24 hours later.
Yeah, it's just annoying to me when. One of my biggest pet peeves, this isn't a trope, but this is a pet peeve, which I guess could probably be its own whole video, but one of my personal biggest pet peeves in books is when time is not properly accounted for. Like if you like the characters wake up and they say, oh, what a wonderful night of lovemaking, sweetie, I'm gonna go make breakfast, and then they like she gets up and makes pancakes, and then it's like, well, what do you want for dinner? I'm like, where did the whole day? Yeah. Or like they'll say, I just put the cake in the oven, let's discuss what to do about problem X. And then it's like 5 lines each of conversation, and then she's like, my cake's done. I'm like, I'm sorry, that conversation just took you an hour.
Yeah, right. Like, where did the last 45 minutes go?
Right.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be perfect.
Similarly, I don't like when you don't know how much time has passed.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I just read a book like that where I feel like this has been a couple days and it's the same day. It's just dinner.
Yeah.
I'm like, you did all that in 8 hours? Like, I'm not buying it. Like,
yeah.
Or it's sort of like vague. And you think, has it been weeks? And they're like, no, we've been married a month. And you're like, what? That's at least 8 weeks of stuff. Like, come on.
Yeah. I'm fine with, I would much prefer it to say later, ... Or like, she did chores around the house waiting in anticipation for his call. Like, when you just leave it super vague like that.
There's some time passing there.
You could be like, okay, she cleaned the whole house, she did all the vacuuming, But when it's like, she did the dishes, and then it's been like, well, now it's time for bed. I'm like, how many dishes did she have to do? Like, so that's a personal pet peeve. But that's not really a trope.
No, but it fits in. It fits.
Okay, we'll count it. All right. Let's pick our top worst tropes that we're tired of seeing. Literature tropes.
Okay. You said mine and I agreed with it.
Oh, so
mine was where the female character doesn't see her own potential, her own beauty, but everybody else is fawning over her or swooning over her or fighting over her. I cannot stand that.
That is your top least favorite trope.
Yes, and I also wrote here where the female, particularly, this bothers me when it's the female, not so much when it's the male, but she is an outsider that everyone is drawn to. I feel like that sort of fits into no one sees her beauty, but she's this outsider that everyone is drawn to and everybody is like fussing over.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't like.
She's
I would
like
rather her be like perfectly mediocre than be this totally brand new outsider or this totally beautiful girl who just doesn't see it. That for some reason that just like, I'm like, oh, come on. Really? Yeah. Come on.
Okay. Well, she's not like other girls.
Right. Yeah, but really.
But is she? I mean,
but like you said with Bella, when she has 5 guys fighting over her on day 1, come on.
Yeah. Now, I would say one of my top least favorite trope is the Mary Sue, where we have a character who's just so blah that she is like essentially not memorable and a complete proxy for the reader. And a lot of people would say that Bella is Mary Sue, and I'm not 100% sure that I agree with that.
See, I would agree with that. I feel like she was a total Mary Sue.
See, I feel like there were examples where she was like well-read and intelligent, and where she, like, multiple examples where she comes up with ideas in the books. Yes, she spends a lot of the time where she's just like freaked out and scared, but also she's like dealing with vampires and stuff. So I'm sort of like, okay, like, you could be scared.
In real life?
Yeah, like I'd probably be a little scared too. And like she is pretty, so, but like, I don't know, clumsy is not a personality trait. I don't know, she comes close.
Yeah.
But it's really frustrating to me when I see the same character who doesn't have personality. And that to me is what I mean by Mary Sue, is like, if I am reading this whole book and I'm just like not interested in the main character, I don't mean dislike, because I can dislike a really like snappy, awesome character.
Like
but
somebody's really dynamic.
Yeah. And like, to me, like Katniss, in some respects, she seems minimally dimensional, but she's not a Mary Sue because she has to like react and make a lot of her own decisions.
Mm-hmm.
I guess, I don't know. I just feel like I looked up a list of like Mary Sue characters, and as I'm like, it's on Goodreads, and as I'm scrolling through, Twilight, of course, is on here, and 50 Shades of Grey is on here, which is Twilight fan fiction, so it's not really that big of a surprise. But as I'm scrolling through, and it shows something that I've read, and I'm like, I have no memory of this book, and it's probably because the main character had no personality.
Right.
So I don't have very many like good recommendations. I don't think there are very many good recommendations of a Mary Sue, but that's a really big frustration to me, is I want the character to have some sort of trait that makes them distinctive.
See, now I'm wondering, like, I'm thinking about myself. I'm wondering how I view myself
Mm-hmm.
and how I like to have a character in a book that I'm reading that I end up really liking, how that probably the female character is portrayed.
Mm-hmm.
Is she more like me, or is she more the opposite of me? I like somebody who's not like 100% set and certain, like in who they are, like where there's room for growth, or they're still trying to figure things out, because I feel like that's like eternally me. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I'm always like working through something, or I'm always trying to figure out who I am or what next, so I can relate to that in a character. But I don't want a character that's totally like flatlining.
Yeah.
Where, like with Bella, I feel like she was always reacting to what was happening to her, not really trying to cause any change in what was happening, or try to really like have a solution other than, oh shoot, something's happening to me, how should I react? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that does make sense. I think you're talking a lot about character arc and growth over a book or a series over time. And I agree that that's really frustrating to read a character who doesn't grow or change. And I would agree with you that just off the top of my head, I don't feel that Bella really changes that much. She falls in love and doesn't feel adequate, and that's sort of where she stays. And it takes her all the way to the end of the fourth book before she's finally like, okay, I think I found where I'm supposed to be. Like, I can now accept myself. So yes, I think it's frustrating when a character doesn't have any like growth or change over the book. But I don't really care whether or not the character is like myself. I just want the character to be distinctive, and I don't just necessarily mean like her long raven tresses. Like if that's like your only characteristic, like you were born with that hair, who cares? But
yeah, that's genetic.
I don't know. I want a character who has some sort of distinctive quality about them. And it could be a character I don't like. I could be like, this character's a bitch, but like maybe her bitchiness makes her an awesome character, you know?
Right. I guess my worry is, what I was thinking is, am I Mary Sue and I don't realize it?
Oh, I 100% feel like I'm a Mary Sue.
Yeah, like if somebody wrote a book about my life, they'd be like, oh my God, no.
But I mean, like you just said, you're always working through something. You're always like kind of growing and evolving and changing. Like,
but in the end, do I have an arc, or do I just stay Mary Sue, Mary Sue?
But I think that there's a big difference between, I think even Mary Sue's can have good character growth. What I'm saying is that a Mary Sue to me is a person who has no personality. So like stuff can happen to a person who has no personality, and then they react to it and handle it well, and then maybe gain a personality. And so they start as a Mary Sue, and then they like come into themselves. And like Bella maybe was like that, where she just like never really grew, and so therefore she just always kind of was stagnant. And so whether or not you think she's a Mary Sue, if you think she's a Mary Sue, she was a Mary Sue throughout.
Yeah.
But
That's what I'm saying. I'm worried. Am I a Mary Sue? Do I just stay stagnant all the time? Do I never have like a blossoming? I like
Well, and like when I was a little, like when I was a teenager, I never thought that someone was going to come to me and be like, you're a wizard, Laura. But I kind of, for a really long time, kept waiting for like my first act event to happen, where it'd be like, okay, so here's the thing in your life that you need to like, here's your trial. Here it is time for you to become, this is chapter 1. Like we open on Laura facing her trial. And like, because that never really happened, like there was definitely times like where at this point in my life, I mean, maybe it's still happening and I'm just like I'm an adult romance now, or not romance, I'm married, but like, I'm an adult story now. But I'm no longer the YA hero. I don't know what else I want to say, really. Did you?
But I guess isn't that the whole point of books, that you can sort of escape your own Mary Sueism?
Yeah,
live someone else's life briefly.
Probably.
Okay.
One last honorable mention, something I meant to say that is a trope that I dislike, that I think is more of like an action movie, fantasy movie kind of thing, is when the protagonist has like a training montage. They're like, I have to learn this skill. And then it shows them being like, I'm learning the skill. Montage. Especially when the like old retired coach comes out of retirement just to like train this guy because they're the promised one. And then it's like 1 week later, they're like, that's right, I am now the master of Kung Fu or whatever. And you're just like, but that guy took 40 years to learn it.
Down to business montage.
Like, yes, very much so. I mean, like, at least in the Let's Get Down to Business, it was like a little unclear on time frame. My frustration, like, I was just watching Avatar: The Last Airbender, and like multiple times, like, people are like, well, I learned this skill, and he's like, well, I'm or Legends of Korra, which is like the sequel. She's like, well, I'm an air master now. And I'm like, you learned this skill like last week.
Right, from someone who studied it their whole lifetime.
That's right.
And now they've just like bestowed all of that knowledge onto you in a minute.
Right. That's a big frustration to me, is like, I understand that there are time constraints in writing a book, and that like it probably would be kind of boring to be like, over the next 6 years he learned this skill. But at the same time, it drives me nuts when like master is teaching novice and novice like matches the master.
But is that because they are the chosen one, that like they just needed to have that skill, like that fire lit inside of them because they are the chosen one, that they could already do that already? They just needed to have like that flame lit.
If it's something that's magical, I'm a little more okay with that.
Right.
Like, you have this inherent ability that you didn't know existed that we are now going to call out of you. Like, sure, if that person's just like really good at that thing, okay, fine. But like, if they're like, oh, I want to learn to be a blade master. Like, if Arya Stark had 2 lessons with her, like with Needle, and then she'd have been like, oh, I could take on anybody, it would have been really unsatisfying. And so like, we see her training throughout all the seasons of the shows, like, it's like, I want there to be progression that is at least vaguely realistic. I don't want a training montage of a clearly 1 season of, like, oh, and over the winter they learned this really complicated skill that should take years of practice. And I'm just like, okay.
Not buying it.
It's like, okay, you now have an orange belt, not a black belt, but an orange belt. I'll give you that.
Right.
Well, this was a really interesting discussion about all of our least favorite and most favorite tropes. Thank you so much for joining me, Nicole. Do you want to plug your channel?
Well, first, thanks for having me. I always enjoy just like shooting the breeze with you, and I'm like bummed that COVID's keeping us apart. We won't go to our little festival in the woods this year. Sort of like looking forward to that being like a yearly tradition. Mm-hmm. But you can find me, if you're interested, at See Nicole Read here on YouTube.
And I will put a link to Nicole's channel in the cards and down in the description. So thanks so much for having me. And we definitely intend to have another chit chat in the future. If there's a topic.
Yes. Oh yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, if there's, we plan to have more chit chats in the future. So if there's any topics that anybody who's watching this wants any discussion on, leave a comment down below, and we'll take that into consideration. We have quite a list actually of fun things that would be to discuss.
Something that I would think would be really fun would be like looking at books that were made into movies or like books or television series. And I don't know, just looking at like which one you liked better, or what things they changed and that you hated, or that you liked the change. I'd like to, that's like one of my favorite things, like books that were made into something movie, television. I like talking about that.
Yeah, I think a book adaptation discussion would be really interesting. I have a couple suggestions for media that I think is actually better than the book, which is, I think, kind of rare.
Yeah, like we're getting into like that topic like for another video, but I cannot stand when I see the show first or the movie first and then read the book. I do better when I read the book first, because otherwise I'm like, oh, I already know what's gonna happen, and that bothers me.
Yeah. Well, that might be our next discussion topic.
It's a good idea.
She says, the one who thought of it.
So many good ideas.
All right. Thanks everybody for tuning in, and catch us here next time. We'll try to do probably the adaptations and kind of give a little teasers for the next time that this is going to be happening, so you can watch out for it. Thanks everybody. Don't forget to like and comment and subscribe, and go and check out Nicole over at See Nicole Read, and bye.
Bye.